Hi, I'm Simon Ravens. I'm a musician, I'm a performer, a writer and a teacher. Now, most of what I do as a musician comes under the umbrella of classical music, but I've often wondered, what is classical music? Now, that question might sound a bit abstract, a waste of time trying to ask, let alone answer, but I don't think it is. Follow me through this little video, and it's just possible that the answer that I'm going to come up with will alter the way that you think about, the way that you play, or the way that you listen to music. So what is it? Well, feel free to click pause here and have a think, because we probably all know what we mean by classical music, but the question is this: could we explain it to a visiting Martian? And if we're not sure that we could, let's do the obvious thing. That's right, let's look on Wikipedia. Here, I'll save you the bother. Wikipedia's one-liner is that classical music is art music of the Western world. Okay, but what on earth is art music? Or, to put it another way, what kind of music isn't art music? I mean, music might sometimes have another job, like giving you something to dance to, or persuading you to buy a tube of toothpaste.
We want blue stripes, we want white, we want the red stripes, but that's all right.
But even then it's doing it, and there's a clue in the word, artfully. Now we might disagree about whether it's good art or bad art, but I just don't know what music can ever be if it's not art. Anyway, art music is in blue, so we can click on it and maybe find out a bit more. We can find out that art music, blah, 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 is music considered to be of high phonoaesthetic value. Well, we'll come back to the blah, blah, blah in a moment, but considered to be of high phonoaesthetic value. Now, Martha the Martian here seems to understand some basic English, but she might have difficulty with that. So I'm going to translate it as people think it sounds really beautiful. Okay? Right, so this must be classical music then. No, it's art music of the Western world, and if 5 million sales doesn't mean that it's considered to be of high phonoaesthetic value, well, I don't know what does. Let's go back though to the blah 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 and see if some of those other terms help. Let's see. Cultivated music. So might this be classical music then? No? What else? Serious. Look, these people are having far too much fun. So presumably that can't have anything to do with classical music. Well, apparently it does. Confusing, eh? Any more blahs that can help? How about that word canonic? Okay, so here's a song that's been covered literally millions of times.
Yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away.
So whatever the musical canon is, that must be part of it, surely. In which case that's classical, whereas this hasn't been performed in nearly 50 years. So that can't really be canonic. Not classical then? Let's keep digging though. Wikipedia says that classical music is of the Western world, so presumably this isn't classical music then. We're just digging ourselves into a bit of a hole here, so can't we make it a bit simpler? Now, when I ask one of my piano pupils what classical music is. They'll sometimes say that it's music played by an orchestra. So I point at the piano that they're playing. Or I point at my throat, and okay, they might say it's not for particular instruments or voices. So then they think about all the music by decomposing composers they play, and they say it's old music. So I ask them about that piece they like playing by Max Richter. If my pupils are feeling a bit cornered by now, they might just fling out something a bit left field, that classical music is posh music. And however much I might want to fight that answer, I have to admit that they might be onto something with posh, and here's why. Warning, 30 seconds of history coming up. When the term classical music was first used about 200 years ago, it referred to music of the recent past. Think Haydn and Mozart. But that soon became known as the classical period, and the term classical music started to take on another meaning. 1840, a man called James Davison publishes The Harmonist, a collection of classical and popular music. Now, classical and popular, well, that's not a historical distinction, that's a social one. And sure enough, in Davison's book, classical music had nothing to do with a narrow historical period. It might include a Renaissance madrigal.
Now is the month of May, when merry lads are playing.
Or an operatic excerpt by Rossini. But what all Davison's classical music did have in common was that it had always been enjoyed by the upper and middle classes, posh people. In contrast, for Davison, were the popular songs that he included. This was music of the people.
Hark the mavis evening sang, Sunden Cluden's words among.
And since Davison made that distinction, I'm afraid that classical music has never really lost the posh people's music tag. Well, not yet anyway. But come on, we've still got Martha waiting for an answer about what classical music is, and posh people's music just tells her who's enjoying it. It doesn't really tell her what they're enjoying. Now, one person who hated the exclusiveness of classical music and who thought the term classical music was meaningless was Leonard Bernstein. Now, he wanted to replace the term classical music and said,
we should call it exact music, because there's only one way it can be played, and that way has been told us by the composer himself.
Told us in the score, Bernstein meant. Presumably in the way that Shostakovich gave an exact metronome mark for the finale of his Fifth Symphony. And Bernstein conducted it at... oh, hold on, about double that speed. Sure, Shostakovich seemed enthusiastic about Bernstein's approach, but he also enthused about conductors who took it at the slower tempo. Now, lots of ink has been spilt in trying to establish exactly what Shostakovich conceived here, but this presumes that he had a single conception. Maybe, shock horror, he was open to different outcomes, and if so, he'd be joining a long and unending line of composers who wrote one thing in the score and seemed very happy to hear another in performance. And standing back from this modern example, we can see why the issue is perennial, because from the year the first dot was written on parchment, the whole business of performers turning visible but silent dots into something that could be heard but not seen, going from one medium to another, suggests that exact music is exactly what classical music can never be. I know what Bernstein meant, but it's just not borne out by reality. And ironically, if you want exact music, well, go no further than modern non-classical music. If I say you're going to hear Miles Davis Kind of Blue, you know exactly what to expect. It's not kind of indigo or kind of cobalt, it's kind of blue. But hold on, what was that word written that I used a moment ago? Does that word offer us a clue about what classical music is? Maybe it does. Now, I'm not sure where I first heard this, but one of the most interesting definitions of classical music I know is this. It's music that needs to be written down. Think about it. You can write down a folk song or a jazz standard or yesterday, but you don't need to. More often than not, those musics were and are first passed on by ear. Well, good luck to a group of musicians trying to pick this up by ear. No, they need it in writing. Did you recognise that, by the way, Martha? Anyway, what I like about this definition is that it doesn't really try to tell us what classical music is, but more how it is. There's one problem with it, though, and it's with that word needs. Is classical music a thing with needs, a power of agency? No, it's only us that have the needs. So music that needs to be written down is getting closer, but it still assumes that music is somehow a thing. And whichever way you head, definitions of classical music as a thing are so riddled with holes. I wonder whether this is what philosophers would call a category mistake, like saying that Martha is in B-flat major. That just makes no sense, and neither can definitions of classical music as a thing. But defining classical music as a process, as a way of making music, seems much more promising. Now, one of the nice things about this is that a process implies change, which in turn means that Davison's socially defined classical music and Bernstein's score-based exact music weren't necessarily wrong. They were just reflections of the way those people thought of classical music at those times. Now, even today, there are people who think that classical music is, by its nature, socially elitist, and others who want us to play exactly what's written in the music and no more. Well, we all have our own views, and they all lead to different takes on classical music. Difference. Thinking of classical music as an open-ended process, not as a narrowly definable thing, really can reframe the way we see it as an art form. At the very least, it might save us the bother of looking for definitive performances of particular pieces. Okay, so here comes my own take on what I think classical music might currently mean. Now, doubtless in the future it will mean something else again. It's even possible, desirable, you might think, that although the music itself will continue to live, the expression classical music will die. Who knows? Anyway, in the here and now, I'm putting this out there. Classical music is a process through which music is communicated primarily through writing. Now, a little footnote to that. Although it results in sound, the communication between composer, performer, and listener starts with the written note. So in that sense, writing is primary. But if we think of that written note as the ultimate authority, as an exact instruction, then I think we're dunking the music in formaldehyde. And writing, let's bear in mind, doesn't have to be an exact instruction set in stone. It can take the form of a cryptic clue or an open invitation. Now, in future videos, I'll explore the fascinating ways, or I think they're fascinating, in which the process of classical music has changed through history and how that might inspire us in the present and in the future. But for now, whether you're a performer, a listener, or a teacher, just try going to a favourite piece of music. Not with the idea and the mindset that it's a specific thing, singular and fixed, but that it's a process which can yield this,
Kommen Sie, Herr Tod.
or this, or, deep breath, this. or whatever we make of it. That make any kind of sense?